Welcome to The Long Strange Trip. I'm Josh, the host of the show. We're going to dig into 6 areas together, finding real work-life integration instead of that brutal 95-5 split too many business owners live with. We're going to approach retirement as an actual reinvention rather than just stopping work. And we're facing death honestly and avoiding PTSD around it. We're also building resilience when life throws us curveballs. We're sharing wisdom across generations. And finally, we're understanding the patterns that show up in all our transitions. I'm not coming at this as an expert. I'm a fellow traveler, figuring this stuff out in real time, especially now as I navigate my own dual cancer diagnosis at 73. Welcome to The Long Strange Trip. I'm glad you're here. This is Josh Patrick, and we're with Russ Thornton, and you're at the Long Strange Trip podcast. And today, Russ owns a wealth management firm. It's called Wealth Care for Women. But we're not going to talk about the technical side of wealth management today. We're going to talk about what many in the industry refer to as the soft side. And one of Russ's core philosophies, he says he helps clients shift focus from financial scarcity to personal priorities. So let's bring Russ on and find out what that means. Hey, Russ, how are you today?
I'm great, Josh. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. So what does it shifting focus from financial scarcity to personal priorities?
That means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But generally speaking, in my experience, many people after working in a career or careers for 30, 40 plus years and receiving a paycheck, often a sizable paycheck, once they make that transition or begin to make the transition into retirement and the paycheck goes away, and many of my clients have been diligent savers over their career. They've kind of reached the top of the metaphorical mountain, if you will. And then the paycheck goes away and they have to start using or spending all of their hard-earned and hard-saved financial resources. And it's amazing to see these people, many of whom are super bright, well-educated, high-achieving performers or executives that were making a lot of money, all of a sudden kind of withdraw into themselves and become very miserly and seem to look at the world through a lens of scarcity, having literally in days, weeks, or just months ago been much more in a abundance mindset because they had the paycheck coming in. And so while there are certainly financial ramifications to that transition and those decision-making, those decisions that need to be made, it's really, to me, fascinating to think about the psychological and the emotional transformation that people need to go through to begin to see the potential and the possibilities beyond, thinking that I have to squeeze the life out of every dollar because, I want to make sure the money lasts and I want to make sure I'll be okay.
So it sounds like one of the challenges the people you work with is what I call underspending.
Yeah, I mean that's a much more succinct way to say it, but yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah, in my experience, my sister is like the poster child for this. She's got probably 3 or 4 times the amount of money she's going to spend in her lifetime. And trying to get her to loosen up and spend a little bit more money is like pulling teeth. So what are some of the strategies that you get to do when people make the switch from earner to spender? And when they go to spender, how do you help them feel safe and realize that it's a stupid thing that they're concerned about?
So before I tackle that, I'll just add a quick aside. Since you mentioned your sister, again, I'm painting with a very broad brush here and being very generalized, but it's interesting to see that in my experience, women are often more afflicted by this, generally speaking, than their male counterparts. And my focus is on serving women, and so I encounter this all the time. But to give you an example, and one I think we may have talked about in our conversations leading up to today's conversation, is that let's say a woman can comfortably afford to spend, based on my analysis, $20,000 a month, adjusted for inflation for the rest of her life. And let's say she's only spending about $8,000, to pick a number. That's a pretty significant delta between 8 and 20. So how do you get her to move closer to what she can spend and hopefully avoid uh, potential regret later in her life for missed opportunities or missed experiences? And it's not an either or. It's not spend 8 or spend 20. It's how can we identify maybe baby steps to get her to start testing the waters of spending a little bit more and avoiding consistent underspending. Examples are literally kind of making it a project, like give her an assignment or give a client an assignment and say, hey, over the next 3 months, I want you to spend $1,000 or $2,000 more a month. So whether you spend it on yourself, your family, your friends, whether you give it to a charity or an organization that's important to you, let's kind of test the waters and put a project in place with a goal, put some boundaries around it, and then check back in with the client and say, all right, A, did you do it? B, if you did, how do you feel? Did it give you anxiety? Were you losing sleep? Or did it feel pretty good? And then based on those, experiences, feelings, emotions, reactions, we can then, adjust and make a plan going forward to either stay at that level, test it a little higher, settle back down to where they started, and maybe we try again a little. So a more concrete example is someone that wants to fly from Atlanta, where I'm based, to Denver, let's say, to visit family. Well, let's say she's always flown coach. I would encourage her to, upgrade to first class as an example. I think the example you had given is instead of an inside cabin on a cruise, make sure you get an outside cabin with a balcony. It might cost $1,000-$2,000 more, but it can really enrich the experience.
The other example I give with that is upgrade to a luxury cruise line.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Yeah. So instead of being on a cruise with 3,000 of your closest friends and neighbors, maybe do a luxury or a smaller boat where there's fewer people. Or once you really start thinking through this, the opportunities to test spending a little bit more are virtually endless.
Now, the reason that I'm so sort of concerned about this issue, and I believe it's a huge issue, by the way, is that we read all the time about people who don't have enough money. But the truth is, the amount of millionaires are growing at a very rapid pace in this country. The middle class is shrinking, but the upper class is growing, and so is the lower class. And the issue is that if you read the press, we don't have enough. But for the people who generally work with financial advisors, in my experience, the opposite problem exists. They have too much. And it's not too much, in a global sense, but it's too much in a local sense because they're not spending it. And in my experience, the real issue comes in when you're in your 70s. That's your golden age to actually spend more than you probably should. Because when you get to your 80s, you're not likely going to be able to.
Yeah. Yeah. I read an article by a UK financial advisor a few weeks ago. He talks about this 12-year period from age 60 to 72, when statistically speaking, those are going to be your highest health, highest energy years, and you should get out and enjoy life. I would agree. I think for a lot of people that have a little bit more wealth, take care of themselves, that can extend well into their 70s. But I would also counter that argument too and say for somebody that's 55, or as an example, because of this scarcity mindset and because of this constant barrage of messages saying that people don't have enough, you need to save more, you need to have X amount of dollars by this age, many people that I get introduced to and start working with, I can demonstrate to them that they can confidently and comfortably retire a lot sooner than they want, or than they thought they could. So somebody that had planned working to 65, and in many respects deferring a lot of aspects of living until once they retire, I'll say, well, why don't we retire at 58 or 60 or whatever and start going out and living your life right now. So I agree that you need to get out and live your life while you have the energy and the physical capability to do so. But I think that can potentially start well before your 70s.
I would agree. And my question is, and it's a question about, do you hear this? You say, okay, you're 55, Mr. Client, or Miss Client, in your case, and I can prove to you, and you agree that you have more than enough assets, probably 4 or 5 times more than you're going to need for the rest of your life. So the chances, if we invest our money wisely, which is what we do, the chances of you running out of money are slim and none. So when you say it's time for you to think about retirement, how often, and I don't think you're going to hear this as much from women as you do from men, is the question is retire to what? Do you hear that often?
More often than I would like. Yeah, maybe this is kind of where you're going with this idea, Josh, but I firmly believe that people should be retiring to something as opposed to just trying to escape or retire from
Well,
work.
absolutely. There's no
work.
question. No, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, so I have more than once I have encountered people, women and men, that so much of their identity is tied up in their work, or so much of their identity has been tied up in raising their family, that once they retire, whether it's in their 50s, 60s, or later, it's kind of like, all right, well, what was all this for? And I think I suspect that is um, that's a reason why we see so much quote gray divorce. Um, People getting divorced later in life because they've spent all these years raising a family and or working. They retire, now they have all this time with each other that they haven't really spent as much time with over the last, let's say, 20 years, and it's kind of like, all right, who is this person? So it's an interesting perfect storm of events that kind of hovers around this retirement transition that again, it's just endlessly fascinating to me, all of the psychological, emotional, and other factors that weigh into those decisions.
Well, do you do anything to help your clients prevent divorce when they retire and all of a sudden they and their spouse are in the same area and they don't really um, know how to talk to each other anymore?
Yes and no. I wouldn't say that I specifically have a structured conversation or process around this, but I do like to believe that some of the conversations I have could hopefully help bridge maybe some of those chasms that have grown over time between spouses. So when I talk with clients, we obviously have to address the quantitative, financial, technical aspects of financial planning, investing, tax planning, et cetera, et cetera. But I also try to spend a fair amount of time on the qualitative. And so we'll have conversations or do exercises like describe your ideal day to me, or describe an ideal week to me, or tell me
Out of curiosity, Russ,
yeah,
how many people can describe their perfect week to you?
very few. It is a
I
it
would
is
think,
a it's an often an uncomfortable conversation.
yes.
But I like to tell clients that I'm very comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. And I've gotten better over the years at embracing the silence. So I'll ask a question, and I've had to fight myself over the years to want to rush in and fill the space. But I've gotten better at just asking the questions and letting them kind of fumble through it on their own. But yeah, to answer your question, very few people have ever thought about how would I spend a random Saturday, or how would I spend a week now that I have this abundance of time. It's interesting to contrast the abundance of time versus the scarcity mindset around their money once they retire as well. So it's just, again, interesting.
Oh, there's a whole factor with, and this probably is more true for men than women. Men do not do a good job, in my experience, of building outside social networks while they're working. Their social network is their work network, period. When they retire, they say, well, I'm no longer a senior executive. I'm no longer a business owner. Who am I? And that question, who am I, becomes the overriding question that makes them incredibly unhappy when they retire.
Yep.
With women, and you can tell me this better than I can, I just have this theory. Women tend to build networks much better than men do. And they do a really much better job of maintaining those networks. So when it becomes time for them to stop working, it's just a natural progression into whatever those networks are. And they don't have a hard time filling the time that they used to have at work. In fact, they may even enjoy it. Men, on the other time, will feel incredibly lonely. And that becomes a really, really huge, huge problem. Now, it's not something I would suspect that you would handle because, frankly, that's therapy.
Yeah. Yeah. I see that all the time. And I agree with your theory. Um, I think you hit it on the head. I think that has been and continues to be a challenge for many men, less so for women, although it can impact women as well. And yeah, I think you asked the most important question is, who am I? I jokingly kind of ask clients, like when they're approaching retirement, like, have you figured out who you want to be when you grow up? Um, and while I ask it kind of tongue in cheek, it's really interesting to kind of let that sit with them and let them think through it, and share their thoughts. Again, often an uncomfortable conversation, but an important conversation nevertheless.
These important conversations are uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah, they are, but they need to they need to happen
They
because
need to happen. That's in my opinion, the good financial advisors force it.
yeah. And you're right. I'm not a therapist, nor do I proclaim to be one. But I think so much of what um, a good financial advisor does bumps right up against
It does. It bumps
therapy,
right.
counseling.
It's
Um,
like this close to each other.
yeah,
And the challenge comes in, I think, I used to be in your world, by the way, so I kind of understand this, is that too many advisors who are working on the soft side, they get themselves into playing the role of a therapist, and they shouldn't be doing it.
yeah,
I see this happen all the time. Now, it's for people who are on the other side that just do the technical shit, excuse my language, technical stuff. Um, they could care less about this, but the folks who work, and it's a small percentage of advisors, I believe, that do this work and do it well. Their challenge is when to say, we're past my skill set. We need to bring in some other help.
yeah, yeah. And in my experience, I think you're exactly right. I would venture to say the vast majority of financial advisors are happy staying in the world of money, technical competence, investments, financial planning. Those that are willing to step outside those bounds and get into the life planning, the qualitative dealing head on with the emotional, psychological aspects of planning, and not just planning around money, but planning around someone's life. Um, I find that many of those advisors, and I've been guilty of this as well, um, are so quick to jump in to that with both feet that yeah, they can quickly find themselves in dangerous territory where they are outside of um, their skill set, and they could potentially do more harm than good. And I have tried to be sensitive to that and recognize when I need to, you know, bring in another professional or suggest the client seek out another professional. But yeah, that can be dicey ground, and it can get dangerous quickly if the advisor isn't careful.
Yeah, I find the best way to deal with these really dicey areas in life, period, is through questions. Like instead of saying, I think you should see a counselor or a therapist, I would say, um, out of curiosity, have you ever thought about seeing a therapist about this stuff? So now we're putting ourselves into a soft question instead of a hard question,
Yeah.
at least in my experience.
Well, that's I knew there was a reason I liked you, Josh. I too am a a student of good questions and asking questions. I often have told clients like, you're not coming to me for answers. You already know what you should be doing in most cases. I'm here to ask you the questions to help you surface, surface those answers and surface, better decision making. So I completely agree. I'm not here to advise the client so much as I am to guide them to reaching their own conclusions grounded in, rational thought and hopefully being able to kind of get out of their own way, if you will, to address what needs to be hit head on.
I have a question for you. And this is kind of off topic, but it's my habit, so you'll have to excuse me. Is that where does personal vulnerability fit into your practice, if at all?
Um, I think that I think that it's super important. I don't know that I ever verbalize it that way, but I have heard it said that every therapist and counselor has to first do their own work on themselves before they can be a good therapist or counselor to other people. Um, I think there's an element of that rings true for the work that I'm trying to do as a financial advisor. Again, not as a therapist, but I have to be very self-aware and somewhat vulnerable, and be willing to, say things like, "I don't know the answer to that, but let's work on finding that out together." And to be, um, the word I would be more comfortable using rather than vulnerability is just humility, and recognizing and being willing to communicate the fact that I'm good at what I do, but there's a lot in the world that I have no experience with or no expertise with, and whether that's bringing in other professionals or asking questions of clients to maybe encourage them to think about seeking additional help or additional resources. Um, I'm very willing to do that, and I think that's an important part of the role that I play in my clients' lives.
Yeah, when I was talking about vulnerability, I'm talking about personal vulnerability. In other words, you being vulnerable about a particular situation when you're talking to a client. I have found that when I show personal vulnerability, it's much easier for people to, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Well, to recognize that we're very similar.
So I don't disagree, and that helps frame it a little bit better in my mind. But yeah, I'm not looking to go out and castigate myself and tell people about all the mistakes and I've made, but I've certainly made them, and I have shared that with clients, whether it's financial or personal or relational. Um, I try to be um, I try to be human, and treat others as humans, as opposed to trying to elevate everything up to like this business transactional formal kind of buzzword filled jargony relationship. I kind of think that's BS. And so I do think it's important to kind of cut through that. And I agree. Being vulnerable is one way to think about it. I think of it more as, in terms of storytelling. So
Yeah, well,
I
that's what they, if you're explaining your vulnerability, it's always going to be through a story.
yeah. So I appreciate you providing some additional clarity there. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's important, and I'm sure I could do a better job of it. But I like to think and act like I am willing to be vulnerable with clients, especially early in new client relationships. I think that, like you said, it makes you more relatable, and helps clients identify and see the person behind the financial advisor, if you will.
I found this was especially true when I was doing some public speaking, is that, my origin story I used to use was about how great I was as a business person and how I built my business from one part-time person to 90 employees when I sold it 20 years later. Well, the only thing that does, it makes the audience feel like they never can do what I did.
Yeah.
So instead, I said, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to mix it up. I'm going to talk about the warts that I had growing my business. And when I did that, the amazing thing happened was I had people in the audience, which I knew were really hard asses. And they came up to me and said, because of the story you told at the beginning, the rest of what you said was believable.
Wow.
So what I learned from that is the more vulnerable I am, the more I talk about my warts, the more I talk about the mistakes I made, people can relate to that because they've had similar situations in their life. Have you ever gotten fired and it's been unfair? Have you ever had a boss that was unreasonable? All those sorts of things. How did you handle that? Those are all things that wander into our office.
Yeah, it's funny. I appreciate you sharing that because I think, I mean, as long as I can remember, there's always kind of been like the highlight reel of the news where you see the highlights of the game or the speech or the business transaction or whatever, and you never see all the stuff behind the scenes that went into that. Now in the world of social media with Facebook and Instagram and the list goes on, there's pretty much 24/7 access to everyone's highlight reel because most people aren't sharing the warts and the mistakes and the hard learned lessons that they experience along the way. So I think it's maybe even more impactful today than it was even 10 or 20 years ago to be willing to be vulnerable and share that with people, because I think that cuts through so much of the shiny, glossy surface that so many people are trying to put out into the world today through social media and other channels.
Yeah, if you read my Substack, you'll see that I'm very vulnerable there.
I'll have to check it out.
I talk about warts all the time.
Yeah.
So, Russ, unfortunately, we are out of time.
That kind of flew by.
Yeah, it always falls. It always happens. And I'm sure there are people who are watching or listening are going to say, gee, Russ might be the type of advisor I want. But how would people find you?
The best way, thank you, Josh. The best way for people to find me is through my website, wealthcareforwomen.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can find me, just search by my name, and that's probably the best way to find me. I write too. I also write on Substack. So if you just search my name in Google, I shouldn't be too hard to find. But if you want to kind of dive right in, probably start with my website.
That's great. And I have two things I'd like you to do. First is if you're still watching or listening, go to wherever you're watching or listening, and please give us an honest rating and review. If you love us, give us 5 stars and say really nice things about us. And if you hate us, give us 1 star and say really mean things about us. And then I'll cry a little bit, but you won't see it, so it doesn't matter. The second thing is, if you think that you would be great on this podcast or good on this podcast or okay on this podcast and want to give it a shot, why don't you send me an email so we can have a conversation to see if this is right for you? It's really easy. You just go to jpatrick@stage2solution.com. That's the number 2, and solution is singular. So it's jpatrick@stage2solution.com. And I would be glad to have a conversation with you, which is how Russ and I started off. So this is Josh Patrick. We're with Russ Thornton. You're at the Long Strange Trip podcast. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I hope to see you here next week. Thanks for spending this time with me today. I really appreciate you being part of this journey. I'd be grateful if you'd leave an honest rating and review. It helps other people find these conversations, lets me know what's landing with you and what isn't. If you love the show, give us 5 stars. And if you hate it, give it 1 star and I'll just cry a little bit. Keep asking the hard questions. Keep being honest about what's difficult. And remember, we're all just trying to figure this out together. I'll talk to you next time on the Long Strange Trip. Thanks for stopping by.